Every morning at Horse Guards Parade in London, the day begins long before most people arrive. The sun has barely risen when the Royal Guard prepares for duty. The air is cool, the streets are still quiet, and only a few early walkers pass by. Among the guards assigned that day is a young soldier named Thomas. He has trained for years to earn his place in this prestigious position. Even though he stands silently for hours in the same spot, he takes pride in every moment of his duty. Thomas dresses carefully, making sure every part of his uniform is perfect. His red tunic is pressed smoothly, his boots polished until they shine, and his tall black bearskin hat sits firmly on his head. Every detail matters because the Royal Guard represents centuries of tradition. For Thomas, it is more than just a job. It is an honor to stand where so many guards before him have stood, protecting history and symbolizing discipline to visitors from around the world. Beside him stands his horse, a tall and beautiful creature named Apollo. Apollo has been part of the Horse Guards for several years. He is calm, well-trained, and trusted by the guards. Thomas often talks to Apollo softly before the shift begins. He pats his neck gently and gives him a small treat. Even though Thomas must stay expressionless while on duty, he silently hopes that Apollo feels relaxed and ready for the day ahead. The bond between a guard and his horse is strong, built on trust and understanding. As the morning light grows brighter, more people begin to arrive at Horse Guards Parade. Tourists from different countries walk along the old stone paths, taking photos and admiring the impressive buildings. Some are curious, some are excited, and some are simply fascinated by the guards who stand so still. They whisper to each other, wondering how the guards manage to remain unmoving for so long. Children point at the horses with wide eyes, thrilled to see them up close. Thomas is aware of everything happening around him. Even though he never turns his head, he hears footsteps, voices, and the familiar sound of cameras clicking. His training has taught him how to stay focused and calm no matter what happens. He knows visitors come from far away, and many of them have never seen a royal guard before. It is natural for them to be amazed. Still, Thomas also knows that some tourists get a little too curious. They forget the rules or ignore the signs that politely ask them to keep a respectful distance. Every day brings something different. Some tourists simply take photos from afar and enjoy the moment quietly. Others try to make the guards smile, even though they are not supposed to react. Thomas has heard all kinds of attempts, funny comments, small jokes, and even light-hearted challenges. While most of it is harmless, it still requires discipline to remain serious. Thomas respects the role he plays, and he wants to honor the responsibility given to him. Across the square, another group of guards begins their shift. Their footsteps echo like a steady drumbeat as they march in unison. Visitors watch with admiration as the guards move with perfect coordination. Many people are surprised by how smooth and practiced every motion looks. It is a reminder that even though the guards appear calm and quiet, their training is intense and their skill is real. The atmosphere around Thomas continues to shift as the day grows busier. The once quiet area becomes lively with laughter, excited chatter, and the shuffle of hundreds of feet. The guards remain still, but they can sense the energy rising. The horses flick their ears, alert but composed. Thomas takes a slow breath and resets his focus. He knows the busiest hours are still ahead. A group of tourists approaches, speaking in cheerful voices. They walk close to the rope that marks the boundary, taking turns posing for photos. One woman gasps softly when Apollo moves his head slightly, surprised to see such a large horse so close. A little boy asks his parents if the guards are real or statues. His parents smile and whisper that the guards are very much real, but they can't break their posture. Thomas hears their laughter and questions, but he does not react. He keeps his eyes forward, his expression steady and composed. This is exactly what he trained for, moving only when necessary and staying completely professional, no matter what happens. Even though he remains still on the outside, his mind is alert, aware of every person stepping near the boundary. His responsibility is to watch, observe, and maintain the dignity of the role. For Thomas, the day is not about being strict or unapproachable. It is about preserving tradition and ensuring that visitors understand the importance of the space they are in. Horse Guards Parade is not just a tourist attraction. It is a symbol of the nation's history. Many tourists appreciate this, even if they do not fully understand the rules at first. From time to time, Thomas remembers stories told by older guards, stories about unusual moments, unexpected situations, and humorous interactions with tourists. Some stories are light and funny, while others remind new guards about the challenges of the role. Thomas learned early on that being a royal guard is a balance between patience and firmness. It requires kindness in the heart, but strength in posture. As more visitors gather, Thomas notices a young couple taking photos. They seem respectful and keep a safe distance, smiling at Apollo with admiration. Moments like these make Thomas feel grateful. It shows that many people truly value the tradition. Even though Thomas cannot smile back, he appreciates their polite behavior. Not far away, a tour guide begins explaining the history of the horse guards to a group of visitors. He talks about the centuries of duty performed here, the ceremonies, and the discipline of the guards. Thomas listens silently, reminded that he is part of something much bigger than himself. Every guard who stands in this place contributes to history in their own quiet way. As the hour changes, the crowd shifts again. Some visitors leave to explore nearby attractions, while new ones arrive, eager to see the famous guards. Thomas remains steady through every moment, his mind focused, his posture firm, and his expression calm. Apollo stands tall beside him, a picture of elegance and strength. Even though the job requires stillness, Thomas does not feel bored. He finds meaning in the responsibility. He watches the world pass by, families making memories, travelers discovering new places, and children learning about history for the first time. In a way, he becomes part of their story as well, even if he never speaks a word. The day continues peacefully, filled with the steady flow of curious visitors. Thomas knows he has many hours ahead, and he is ready for all of them. It is just the beginning of the day, and though nothing unusual has happened yet, he senses that the crowds today may bring a few surprises. Perhaps a tourist will get too excited, or someone will misunderstand the rules. Thomas stays prepared, knowing that his calm reaction and disciplined posture are essential. For now, the sun shines warmly on the historic square. The horses breathe softly in the gentle breeze, and the tourists admire the scene with wide-eyed wonder. Thomas remains the silent guardian of the moment, standing proudly as part of a tradition that continues to inspire people from all over the world. As the morning sun climbs higher, the crowds around Horse Guards Parade continue to grow. The excitement in the air is undeniable. For tourists, it is a dream come true to see the Royal Guard up close, and many can't resist the urge to take photos or videos to remember the moment. Among the people gathered is a young woman named Clara, who has been dreaming of this day for months. She's traveled all the way from the United States to visit London, and standing in front of the Royal Guards feels like something out of a storybook. Clara's eyes sparkle as she looks at the soldiers in their bright red uniforms, their tall bearskin hats, and their majestic horses. She can't believe how close she is to history. For her, this moment feels magical. The horses stand tall, and the guards remain perfectly still, making the scene look like a living painting. She takes out her camera, eager to capture every angle. But Clara, like many others, doesn't realize the importance of the boundaries that are clearly marked around the guards. Her first instinct is to step closer to the rope that separates the guards from the public. She's seen the guards standing still in the pictures, but in real life, She wants to get a better shot, one where she can truly see the details of the guard's uniform. A little closer won't hurt, right? She takes a few steps forward, her camera raised, hoping to capture that perfect close-up photo of the horse and the guard side by side. As she moves, she notices that the guard, a young man named Thomas, doesn't even flinch. He remains perfectly still, his face calm and stoic, as though he's not bothered by the growing crowd. Clara feels a sense of awe, admiring his ability to stand motionless for so long. But as she inches closer to the rope, she doesn't notice that she's crossed the line. Quite literally. Her feet are now just a few inches from the rope, too close for comfort. Clara starts snapping away, excited by the clear view of the horse's strong neck and the fine details of Thomas's uniform. She feels proud of the photos she's getting. But soon, she begins to notice something strange. A few other tourists around her seem to be whispering, their eyes focused on her. Clara wonders if she's done something wrong but dismisses the thought. After all, everyone else seems to be taking pictures too. But then, Clara hears a soft voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss." It says, calm but firm. She turns to see another guard, standing nearby, watching her closely. The voice is polite, but there's a sense of authority in it. "Please step back," he adds, pointing to the rope she had unknowingly crossed. Clara blinks in surprise, unsure of what to say. She hadn't meant to break any rules, but now it seems like she's done something wrong. The man who spoke to her doesn't wait for a response. Instead, he takes a small step back and gestures for Clara to move away from the rope. He does this without raising his voice, without anger, and without making a scene. It's as though he has done this 100 times before, and he probably has. Clara quickly realizes that this isn't a moment to argue or make excuses. She nods, steps back to the safe distance, and lowers her camera. As she moves away from the rope, Clara's face turns a shade of pink. She feels embarrassed, but also a little confused. She had no idea that standing so close could be a problem. She had simply wanted to capture a picture that would do justice to the grandeur of the royal guard. Now, she feels self-conscious and worried that she might have made a bad impression. But just as she's about to turn and walk away, something happens. Thomas, the guard she had been so fascinated by, shifts slightly on his horse. Clara doesn't know it, but this movement is part of the guard's routine. He's adjusting his posture ever so slightly, making sure that everything is just right. This action, although subtle, catches Clara's attention. She watches in awe as he makes a small adjustment to his hat. For just a second, she can see the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. It's as if, in that moment, he is acknowledging her, acknowledging the people who are watching him do his duty. Clara suddenly feels a deep respect for the young man who stands so still and composed, no matter how many tourists are around. She feels guilty for intruding too much on his space, but at the same time, she realizes that she is witnessing something much bigger than herself. The guard's silence, his stillness, represents a tradition that has lasted for centuries. Clara can't help but be humbled by that thought. As the minutes pass, the crowd around her continues to watch the guards, but Clara's focus has shifted. She now observes the subtle movements, the tiny gestures that make the guard's presence so impressive. The horses flick their tails or paw the ground every now and then, but otherwise, they stand perfectly still as well. The scene seems almost surreal, and Clara feels like she's part of something historic. She looks around and notices that many of the other tourists have quietly taken a step back too, respecting the invisible lines they had once crossed without realizing it. By now, the tourist group around Clara has grown a little quieter. Some of the visitors continue to take pictures from a safe distance, while others simply stand still, appreciating the scene. The quiet moments are refreshing. Everyone seems to sense the unspoken understanding that, though they are surrounded by crowds, this space is special. There is a respect in the air that wasn't there before. Clara, still a little embarrassed, stands back and takes in the view. She realizes that while she may have come here wanting to get the perfect photo, she has learned something much more valuable. The Royal Guard isn't just a symbol of history or tradition. It is a living representation of respect and discipline. The guards are not here for entertainment. They are here to serve a purpose, to protect, to honor, and to keep the tradition alive. And that tradition must be respected by everyone, even tourists like herself. As she watches Thomas and the other guards, Clara begins to appreciate the quiet strength they embody. It's easy to see the guards as just statues or part of a performance, but they are much more than that. They are the living link to the past, carrying centuries of history and responsibility on their shoulders. Clara begins to understand that the rules are in place for a reason. The guards stand still, not just to pose for photos, but to remind everyone of the significance of the role they play in Britain's history. Clara finally steps back a little further, not wanting to make the same mistake again. She adjusts her camera. She takes a moment to simply enjoy the sight before her. She realizes that sometimes it's better to observe in silence, to experience the moment without rushing to capture it. As she stands quietly, the wind rustles the leaves of the nearby trees, and the sound of horse hooves tapping gently on the cobblestone fills the air. She watches Thomas again, and this time, she sees him not just as a soldier, but as part of something much larger. The day continues, and the atmosphere becomes less frantic. Clara feels calmer now, her earlier embarrassment fading into a sense of pride. She was here, witnessing a piece of living history, and she was learning to appreciate it in a way she hadn't expected. The Royal Guard's presence is not just about standing still. It is about maintaining the dignity of a tradition that defines an entire nation. And for Clara, the real lesson of the day is about understanding and respecting the meaning behind every movement, every gesture, and every unspoken rule. As the morning continued, the crowd around Horse Guard's parade grew even larger. The buzz of excitement filled the air, and tourists crowded along the roped-off area, eager for a glimpse of the famous Royal Guard. The warm sunlight cast long shadows on the cobblestones, making the scene feel almost dreamlike. Clara, still reflecting on her earlier experience, stood back a little further, now more aware of the respect needed in this space. She observed quietly as new visitors arrived, many of them eager to take photos, ask questions, and get closer to the guards. But most were careful to stay behind the rope that separated the tourists from the guards. Not far from Clara, another group of tourists arrived, led by a cheerful young man with a camera hanging around his neck. His group was large, filled with families and friends excited to explore London's historic sites. Among them was a man named David, a father of 2 young children who had never seen the Horse Guards before. His children, Sarah and Jake, were brimming with excitement, their eyes wide as they watched the guards standing tall and still on their horses. The children were both eager to see the horses up close, but they also seemed a little unsure of the guards' serious faces. David took out his phone, determined to get a picture of the kids with the guards in the background. He positioned his children in front of the rope, carefully guiding them to a spot where they could be in the frame without getting too close. Sarah, the older of the 2 children, smiled brightly, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Jake, on the other hand, clung to his father's side, a little nervous about being so close to the horses. David assured him, "It's okay, buddy. Just smile for the photo." But as David focused on taking the perfect shot, Sarah's curiosity got the best of her. She noticed the horse standing just a few feet away, and her eyes lit up. Without thinking, she stepped closer to the rope, stretching her hand out to touch the horse. It was a simple gesture, innocent enough in her mind, but it crossed a line. Thomas, who had been standing silently near his horse Apollo, noticed the movement out of the corner of his eye. He had seen similar situations countless times before, tourists getting a little too close to the horses, children reaching out in excitement. Most of the time, the guards allowed it to pass without comment, as long as the boundaries weren't crossed too much. But Sarah's hand was just a little too close to the horse. It wasn't dangerous, but it could have easily startled Apollo, who was not used to sudden movements from strangers. Thomas, ever watchful, took a deep breath. He didn't want to make a scene, but his duty was clear. He had to ensure the safety of both the tourists and his horse. Slowly, he shifted his weight, bringing his attention to Sarah. He could see the joy in her face as she reached out. But it was his job to make sure no one got too close. "Excuse me, miss," Thomas said firmly but calmly. His voice, though low, carried an authority that made Sarah freeze in her tracks. She looked up at him, startled. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. The crowd around them fell silent, watching the interaction with curiosity. Thomas didn't raise his voice, but there was no mistaking the seriousness of his tone. "Please step back from the horse," he added, pointing gently to the rope that marked the boundary. Sarah blinked in surprise, her hand still hovering near the horse. She had not meant to cause any trouble. She just wanted to get a closer look at the majestic animal. But now she understood that her excitement had crossed a boundary. She quickly pulled her hand back and took a step away from the rope, her face flushed with embarrassment. David, noticing the tension in the air, looked over and apologized. "Sorry about that. We didn't mean any harm." He gave Sarah a gentle nudge, and she nodded sheepishly. Testerly, Thomas gave a small nod in return, acknowledging the apology. He knew that most people didn't mean any disrespect. They were simply excited to be in the presence of something so historic. Still, he couldn't let his guard down. It was his job to maintain order and ensure everyone respected the space around the guards. As Sarah stepped back, Thomas returned to his still position. He could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that his actions had caught the attention of the crowd. People around him murmured softly, some commenting on how serious the guards were, while others marveled at how well-trained the horses were. Thomas, though, was focused solely on his responsibility. He had not meant to create an uncomfortable situation, but sometimes it was necessary to draw a clear line. For Clara, watching from a distance, the interaction served as a reminder of how delicate the balance was between respecting the guards and the public's curiosity. She could see how easily the situation could escalate. A small gesture, an innocent mistake, could easily lead to something more serious. And yet, Thomas had handled it so calmly, without raising his voice or making anyone feel bad. It was a lesson in patience, professionalism, and the quiet strength of those who served in this role. As the moment passed, the crowd slowly returned to their usual chatter. But Clara couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She admired Thomas for his ability to maintain control of the situation without letting it get out of hand. It was clear that being a royal guard required more than just standing still. It required a deep sense of duty and an unwavering commitment to the tradition that came with it. The incident with Sarah was just one of many similar situations that Thomas had faced over the years. He had seen tourists reach out to touch the horses, ask silly questions, and even try to engage the guards in conversation. Most of the time, he let it slide. But there were moments when things had to be addressed. These small interactions were reminders of the respect that was expected in this space. The guards were not there for entertainment. They were there to protect a symbol of history and maintain order. As the day wore on, the crowd continued to ebb and flow, each new group of tourists bringing their own energy and excitement. Thomas stood firm, his eyes scanning the area, always alert to the movements of those around him. Despite the constant influx of visitors, he felt a sense of calm. He had been trained for this. Every step, every movement, was part of a routine that had been practiced for centuries. It was a role that demanded not only discipline, but a deep understanding of history and tradition. Clara, still standing nearby, couldn't help but feel a growing sense of respect for the guards. She had seen firsthand how quickly things could go wrong and how gracefully they were handled. It was not just about the guards' stoic appearance. It was about their ability to manage situations with quiet authority, ensuring that everyone felt safe and respected. For Clara, this was no longer just about taking a photo of the guards. It was about understanding the significance of their role and the dedication it took to stand there, day after day, without fail. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the scene, Clara took one last look at Thomas and the other guards. She could see how the day had unfolded, how, despite the small hiccups, everything had remained calm. The tourists around her were still taking photos, chatting quietly, and admiring the guards, but there was a sense of reverence in the air now. It was as if, without saying a word, the guards had reminded everyone of the importance of respect and discipline. For Thomas, the day was not over yet. He still had hours of duty left, but he stood tall, knowing that his role was more than just a job. It was a privilege, and one that he took seriously. As the crowd slowly began to thin, and the tourists left to explore the rest of London, Thomas remained steadfast, keeping watch over the Horse Guards parade. And as he did, he knew that, in his own quiet way, he was preserving a tradition that had lasted for centuries. It wasn't just about standing still, it was about standing for something much greater. As the afternoon wore on, the steady flow of visitors around Horse Guards parade continued. But the atmosphere had changed slightly. The sun was now higher in the sky, and the once cool air had warmed up. For Thomas, the guard who had been standing vigilantly for hours, the day was starting to feel long. He remained unmoving, his attention sharp as ever, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but wonder how much longer he had until his shift was over. Nearby, Clara, still lingering from her earlier encounter with the guard, couldn't help but notice the shift in the crowd's energy. It seemed like people had started to settle into a quieter, more respectful rhythm. Perhaps it was the warm weather, or the calm, that had fallen after the small incident with Sarah. Whatever it was, Clara felt like she had gained a new understanding of the Royal Guard's purpose and what it meant to be part of such a long-standing tradition. As she stood there, the crowd around her began to thin out slightly. Many tourists had already taken their photos and were ready to move on to other attractions around London. But a new wave of people arrived, fresh and eager to see the Horse Guards for themselves. Among the newcomers was an older couple, John and Mary, who had recently retired and were traveling across Europe. They had planned this trip for years, and seeing the famous guards in London was one of the highlights of their journey. Both of them were in their late 60s, and though they had traveled extensively, they had never quite seen anything like this. John and Mary slowly walked toward the rope, their eyes scanning the horses and guards with admiration. They stopped for a moment to take in the grandeur of the scene. John, a quiet man with a love for history, had always been fascinated by the Royal Guards. He had read about them in books, seen them in documentaries, but standing there in person, in the heart of London, was something entirely different. The sight of the guards, standing as still as statues, their eyes focused on the distance, filled him with a deep sense of respect. Mary, on the other hand, was a little more curious. She was fascinated by the horses, marveling at their size and beauty. She had always loved animals, and the sight of the majestic steeds made her smile. She leaned over to John and whispered, "They're just so impressive, aren't they?" John nodded, his eyes not leaving the guards. "Yes, they are. It's hard to believe that they've been doing this for centuries." As Mary marveled at the horses, John noticed something in the distance, a group of young tourists walking closer to the guards, laughing and chatting loudly. Their behavior was not disrespectful, but the volume of their voices was starting to distract from the peaceful atmosphere. John, a man who valued calm and order, found himself slightly uncomfortable with the noise. He didn't mind people enjoying themselves, but he could see how it might affect the guards. Suddenly, one of the tourists, a young man in his 20s, took a few bold steps forward, attempting to get closer to one of the horses. He was trying to get a better picture, aiming his camera just inches away from the horse's face. His friends were urging him on, laughing, unaware of the line he was crossing. The young man seemed oblivious to the rules, too caught up in the excitement of the moment to notice the boundary. Thomas, ever vigilant, noticed the movement right away. His eyes narrowed slightly as he saw the young man getting too close to Apollo. His horse. Thomas knew that he had to act quickly. While the situation wasn't dangerous yet, it could easily escalate if the tourist's actions weren't addressed. The horse, although well-trained, was still a living animal, and even the smallest unexpected movement could startle it. With a deep breath, Thomas shifted his weight ever so slightly. His presence alone was enough to draw the attention of the young tourist. Without hesitation, Thomas spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Please, step back behind the rope." The young man looked up, momentarily startled. He had not expected the guard to speak directly to him. His friends fell silent, sensing the change in the air. The young man looked around, trying to gauge the reaction of the crowd. But Thomas's gaze remained steady and unwavering. The young tourist hesitated, then sheepishly stepped back, glancing at his friends for reassurance. "Sorry," he muttered, embarrassed by the guard's firm response. He quickly returned to his group, and they all moved a little further away from the ropes. The crowd around them fell into a soft silence, the energy shifting once again. Clara, who had been watching from a distance, noticed the subtle change in the atmosphere. She had seen Thomas handle the situation with the young tourist with the same quiet authority he had shown earlier when Sarah reached out to the horse. It was a gentle reminder to everyone that this space was sacred, and that respect for tradition was non-negotiable. John and Mary, who had been observing the exchange, exchanged glances. "Well, that was handled well," John said softly, his voice full of admiration for the guard's calm demeanor. Mary nodded in agreement, her eyes now focused more intently on the guards. "I think people forget sometimes," she said, her voice thoughtful. "They see the guards, and they think they're just part of the scenery. But they're not just standing there for show. Are they?" "No, they're not," John agreed. "They're part of a tradition. And sometimes, people need reminding of that." The incident had passed, but the quiet had returned to Horse Guards Parade. The tourists who had been too close to the guards had now stepped back, and the crowd seemed to become more aware of the rules. The roped-off area was no longer just a boundary. It had become a symbol of respect for the history that the guards represented. No one wanted to push the limits anymore. They had witnessed firsthand the quiet power of the guards' presence. Clara, now feeling more at ease, couldn't help but reflect on the lessons that had unfolded before her. She had come to London to see the Royal Guards, but she was leaving with a deeper understanding of their role and the importance of respecting the space they occupied. It wasn't just about the soldiers standing still or the horses remaining perfectly poised. It was about the tradition and the history they represented. It was about the discipline, the dedication, and the quiet strength of those who served. As the day drew to a close, the crowd began to thin out even more. The sunlight softened, and the shadows grew longer on the cobblestones. Tourists who had come earlier in the day now made their way toward other parts of London, while some lingered a little longer, still in awe of the Royal Guards. Clara, now feeling more connected to the experience, took one last look at Thomas and the other guards. She had witnessed something meaningful, something that was much more than just a photo opportunity. John and Mary, too, began to walk away, their hearts full of gratitude for the experience. They had seen the Horse Guards in person, something they had dreamed about for years. And as they left the square, they spoke quietly about the guards' dignity and the peace they had brought to the day. For Thomas, the day was far from over. The sun was beginning to set, and he still had a few more hours of duty ahead. But as he stood there, watching the last of the tourists leave, he felt a quiet sense of pride. The job was not always easy, but it was important. It was a reminder of the nation's history, a history that had been preserved through countless generations. And in his stillness, in his discipline, Thomas was part of that history too. As the last visitors trickled away from Horse Guard's parade, the square grew quieter, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The once busy area, full of tourists, was now peaceful and serene, with the gentle sounds of footsteps fading into the distance. The stillness of the royal guards remained unchanged, though, as Thomas, the young soldier on duty, continued to stand proudly next to his horse, Apollo. The horse shifted slightly, adjusting his stance after hours of standing still. But otherwise, the moment felt timeless. It was a familiar feeling for Thomas, one that he had experienced many times before during his shifts. But today, something felt different. The last tourists who had been watching the guards slowly made their way to the exit, some lingering to snap a final photo of the iconic scene. As Clara, who had been present throughout the day, turned to leave, she took one last look at the royal guards. She felt a deep sense of respect for what she had witnessed. The discipline, the dedication, and the history that surrounded her now seemed even more significant. What had started as a casual visit to see the famous horse guards had turned into something much more meaningful, a lesson in patience, respect, and the importance of tradition. For Clara, the experience had been eye-opening. When she first arrived, she had been focused on getting the perfect picture, eager to capture the moment for herself and her friends. But after seeing the guards in action, after understanding the quiet authority they commanded, she realized that there was so much more to it than just a photo opportunity. She had seen how a simple step too close to the boundary could disrupt the entire atmosphere. But she had also seen how gracefully those moments were handled. It wasn't about the guards being stern or unapproachable, it was about preserving something greater than themselves. Clara paused for a moment, standing near the edge of the square, reflecting on the day's events. She thought back to the small incident with the young tourist who had stepped too close to the rope. She had seen Thomas handle the situation calmly and with authority, and it struck her how important it was for everyone to respect the space around the guards. She realized that, while it was easy to take the guards for granted, they were part of something much bigger than any individual experience. The guards weren't there for entertainment. They were there to uphold a tradition that had been passed down through generations, a tradition that deserved to be respected. Meanwhile, Thomas stood in his place, his gaze focused ahead, his posture still as perfect as when he had first begun his shift. He could feel the cool breeze beginning to blow through the square, signaling that the day was drawing to a close. His shift was almost over, but there was still something about the quiet of the moment that made it feel like time was standing still. There had been many tourists throughout the day, many who had come to see the royal guards, and some who had made the same mistakes as others, getting too close or disregarding the rules. But Thomas didn't mind. He had learned to be patient. He had learned that part of his job was not only to stand still, but to also quietly remind people of the significance of the role he played. It wasn't about power or control, it was about tradition and the respect it deserved. As Thomas thought about the day, he recalled the earlier moments when he had seen the excitement in the faces of the tourists. He remembered the young couple, John and Mary, who had stood quietly, admiring the guards and the horses. He thought about the children who had been eager to take a closer look at the horses, their faces filled with wonder. He smiled inwardly, thinking about how, despite the seriousness of his role, he was also part of something that brought joy to so many people. The tourists may have been fascinated by the uniforms, the horses, and the strict discipline, but they were also witnessing a piece of history that continued to be lived out every day. And he, along with the other guards, played a small but important role in that. As the square emptied, Clara slowly made her way toward the exit. She felt the weight of the day settle in her mind, the experience leaving an impression that would stay with her for a long time. She hadn't expected to learn so much from a visit that, at first, seemed like just a quick stop on her London itinerary. But now, as she walked through the cobbled streets, she understood the deeper meaning behind what she had witnessed. It wasn't just about seeing something famous, it was about appreciating the dedication and discipline that went into maintaining a tradition. It was about recognizing the people who, like Thomas, quietly upheld the legacy of the Royal Guard day after day, with no expectation of praise or recognition. In the distance, Clara could still see Thomas standing, his figure outlined by the fading light. She smiled to herself, a quiet sense of admiration growing within her. She had learned something valuable that day, something that went beyond the photos she had taken. She had learned that tradition wasn't just about the past, it was about the present, too. The Royal Guards were not just symbols of history, they were active participants in keeping that history alive. And it was up to people like her, and others, who visited, to recognize and respect the role they played. Thomas, meanwhile, stood as still as ever, his mind focused on the task at hand. His shift would soon be over, and he would be replaced by another guard, ready to continue the duty. It was a cycle that had continued for centuries, with each guard playing their part in a long line of tradition. For Thomas, it was both an honor and a responsibility that he took seriously. He knew that while his time on duty might seem quiet and uneventful to some, it was far from it. His role was essential in preserving a piece of British history, and he was proud to be part of that legacy. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the square, Thomas allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. It had been a good day. He had done his job well, and the visitors had shown the proper respect for the tradition. The crowd had been kind, and the minor incidents had been handled without drama. It was days like these that reminded him why he had chosen this path, to be part of something larger than himself, to serve as a guardian of history, and to play a role in the ongoing story of the Royal Guard. In the end, Clara and Thomas's experiences had been more connected than they might have realized. While Clara had come to learn about the Royal Guard, Thomas had quietly reminded her, and countless others, of the importance of respecting the traditions that made London so special. And while she had walked away with a new understanding of what it meant to stand still, Thomas had continued to do so, as he had done countless times before, preserving the dignity and legacy of the Royal Guard for another day. As the night began to fall, and Horse Guards' parade grew even quieter, the city of London continued on. But for Clara, and for those who had witnessed the Royal Guard that day, the memory of the guards, their stoic presence, and their quiet authority would stay with them for years to come.